We all think we know the Nativity story, right? Shepherds, a manger, a bright star in the sky. But what if the real story, the core message, isn't just about a special baby being born? What if it's about a complete revolution in how we even think about God? Well, today, that's exactly what we're going to dive into. So let me ask you a quick question. If you had to name God's single most defining attribute, what would you say? Probably something like power, majesty, greatness. Yeah, for most of human history, those would have been the no-brainer answers. It's kind of the default setting for how we imagine a creator.
But the Nativity story, it flips that completely on its head. It says, sure, greatness is assumed. That's the easy part. But the attribute that had to be revealed was humility. It trades the power we'd expect for a vulnerability that is just shocking. You see, the idea that God is great doesn't need a special messenger. Everyone kind of gets that. But the idea that God is humble? Whoa, now that was a message that had to be delivered in person.
To really get how radical this was, you have to picture the world it was born into. Humility wasn't just, unpopular. For the smartest people in the ancient world, the greatest thinkers, it literally wasn't even on the map as a good thing to be.
Okay, check out this fantastic story. You've got this philosopher, Diogenes, who wants to prove how humble and simple he is. So he walks with his muddy feet all over the super expensive carpets of the famous Plato. He's basically shouting, "Look at me, I'm rejecting your wealth." But Plato's comeback is just legendary. He says, "You are trampling on my pride with another kind of pride." You see, even the act of pretending to be humble was just another way to be proud. And that brings us to the core argument here. If the biggest human problem is pride, then the answer can't just be a bigger, more powerful God to remind us how small we are. That doesn't really fix it. No, the source material argues that the only real cure, the only true antidote, was for God to show us the one thing we couldn't figure out on our own, what real humility looks like. Think about it like this. Imagine you have a beautiful fish tank. You love your fish. You give them the perfect food, the perfect water temperature, but every single time you come near the glass, they freak out and hide. They just can't understand you or your love for them. So what's the only way to truly show them you mean them no harm? You'd have to become a fish. You'd have to swim among them on their level. And that's the analogy here for divine humility, the Creator willingly entering the creation. Okay, so let's see how this incredible idea of humility is actually woven into the Nativity story. The first clue is a big one. Who got the news first? It wasn't the powerful people. It wasn't the religious elites in the big city. Not even close. The announcement came to a bunch of shepherds. Socially, these guys were at the absolute bottom of the ladder. But the location? Oh, this is key. These weren't just any old fields. This is exactly where the lambs were raised for sacrifice in the Jerusalem temple. So the message about the ultimate sacrifice arrives right at the heart of the old system of sacrifice. And the best part? Unlike the experts who would hear the news later and be skeptical, these shepherds, they believed it right away and became the very first preachers of the good news. All right, the humility doesn't stop there. The next piece of evidence is this willing submission to the rules. Think about it. The one who wrote the law, now placing himself under the law. We see two really specific acts. First, on day 8, the circumcision, which fulfills that ancient covenant with Abraham. Then, on day 40, the family goes to the temple for the presentation, following the laws for firstborn sons and the purification of the mother. These weren't just empty gestures. They were powerful acts of solidarity, of saying, "I am one of you." And this is just brilliant, theologically speaking. By following every single rule, every statute, right from the very beginning, he was establishing a life that was legally blameless. It meant that later on, when his enemies were looking for a reason to condemn him, they couldn't point to him being a lawbreaker. He'd already checked every box. This all builds to this pivotal moment in the temple, when the infant Messiah is brought right into the heart of the nation's religious life. Who actually gets it? Who recognizes him? Well, spoiler alert, it's not the people in charge. Two people step forward out of the crowd, Simeon and Anna. And there's this beautiful symmetry to it. You have Simeon, a man, a priest from the south, and you have Anna, a woman, a prophetess from a northern tribe. A man and a woman, north and south, priest and prophet. Together, they basically represent the entire faithful remnant of Israel, just patiently waiting and hoping. And Simeon's backstory is, well, it's just incredible. An ancient tradition says he was one of the scholars translating the Hebrew Bible into Greek almost 300 years earlier. And when he got to that famous prophecy in Isaiah
about a virgin conceiving a child, he just couldn't believe it. It seemed impossible. So the story goes, a messenger told him he would not die until he saw that very prophecy with his own eyes. And so he waited for centuries.
So think about that. The high priest, the scribes, all the important people running the temple that day, they just saw another poor family from the countryside making their offering. Nothing special. But Simeon, whose vision was sharpened by centuries of waiting, and Anna, whose heart was tuned by decades of prayer, they saw the salvation of the entire world. Recognition didn't come from power or position. It came from devotion.
And all of this leads to a powerful and honestly, a pretty sobering conclusion. This radical message of divine humility, it wasn't supposed to be easy. It wasn't meant to make everyone feel comfortable. It was destined to draw a line in the sand.
As Simeon is holding this baby, he delivers this incredible, stark prophecy. He says this child, this living, breathing example of God's humility, will be a sign of contradiction. People are going to be forced to make a choice. For some, embracing this kind of upside-down thinking will be their rising. But for others, clinging to their own pride and power will be their fall. It's a message that forces you to pick a side. So when you step back and look at the whole picture, the pattern is just so clear, isn't it? Born in an animal's feeding trough, not a palace. The news is announced to outcasts, not rulers. He submits to the law, doesn't claim to be above it. And he's recognized by the poor and the patient, not the powerful and the proud. Every single detail points to this one radical, world-changing idea. And that leaves us with a pretty challenging question to think about. If the Nativity story is telling us that the ultimate divine power is expressed through ultimate weakness and humility, what does that mean for us today? For a culture that is so often obsessed with strength, with status, with winning? It's a contradiction that 2,000 years later might be more relevant and more challenging than ever before.